The saloon raged with drunken laughter and thick cigar smoke. It was 1884, and Scorpion's Drift lived under the suffocating shadow of one man, Corbin Hawker, the ruthless leader of the Dust Vipers gang. He controlled every corner, every business, every drop of liquor poured. Where his men walked, fear followed like a starving coyote. But tonight, something had broken the familiar pattern of brutality and submission. At that corner table sat two women who did not belong. Mai and Leanne, barely in their 20s, possessed a grace that was alien to this wretched place. Their long, dark hair was woven into simple, practical braids. In stark contrast to the dirt-caked denim and leather around them, they wore matching traditional dresses of silk. The garments were elegant yet simple, cut in a way that hinted at a freedom of movement that belied their formal appearance. They were designed not for attention, but they commanded it all the same. Their faces, though youthful, held an ancient calm, and their hands, resting on the table, were perfectly steady. Nobody understood what women like them, clearly outsiders, wanted in a hellhole like this. Corbin Hawker sized them up with pure, undiluted contempt. A pair of young foreign dolls, forgotten relics from the railroad camps, he thought. He approached slowly, a predatory grin spreading across his scarred face, while his gunman snickered, already anticipating the cruel sport to come. Hawker, holding a half-empty bottle of beer, stopped before their table. He loomed over them, his shadow swallowing them whole. "Well, look what the dust blew in," he sneered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "A matching set. Welcome to hell, little dolls. I run this town." Neither Mai nor Leanne responded. Their gazes remained fixed on their empty cups, their expressions as placid as if the insult had never been spoken. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Something in the air shifted, a subtle change in pressure, a gathering of storm clouds on a clear day. There was something profoundly wrong about these women, something contained and coiled like twin serpents, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. One of the gunmen, a nervous man named Patch, whispered, "Boss, they ain't even blinking. Something ain't right." Enraged by their utter lack of fear, Hawker's sneer twisted into a snarl. With a swift, violent motion, he tilted the beer bottle, splashing the stale, foamy dregs over both of their faces. The cold liquid ran down their cheeks and dripped from their chins, staining the fine silk of their dresses, but they did not move. They did not wipe it away. They did not even blink. Hawker then shoved the table hard. The two porcelain cups skittered across the wood, fell to the floor, and shattered into 100 pieces. Still, the young women didn't flinch. Only then did they raise their gazes in perfect unison. Two pairs of identical dark eyes locked onto Hawker, and the saloon's boisterous noise died in an instant. It was a calm, frozen stare, hollow and ancient, a stare that promised nothing but a meticulously planned ending. It was a look that didn't belong to any women they had ever known. Scorpion's Drift was a town God had forgotten and the devil remembered fondly. 3 dirt streets, a failing bank, a church without a preacher, and a saloon that never closed. Law had passed through years ago on its way to somewhere else and had never bothered to stay. This was outlaw territory, and Corbin Hawker was its uncrowned king. 2 years back, Hawker and his Dust Vipers had burned the sheriff's office to the ground and hanged the mayor from the telegraph pole as a warning. Since then, nobody had dared to challenge them. They collected illegal taxes, stole cattle, and brought misery to anyone who crossed their path. The town didn't just live in fear, it breathed it. Mai and Leanne had arrived on the Tuesday stagecoach. They carried no luggage, only 2 simple cloth satchels, and wore matching weary expressions. They paid for a room at Martha's boarding house with tarnished silver coins, their movements synchronized and efficient. They spoke to no one and asked no questions, their eyes simply watching, absorbing every detail, every shadow, every fearful glance from the townsfolk. Curious and a little worried, the widow Martha asked where they came from. It was Leanne who answered, her voice quiet but clear, like the chime of a distant bell. From a place that is only a memory now. That first night, Mai and Leanne sat alone in the gilded Scorpion, sipping their tea. The men shouted, cheated at poker, and smashed bottles, the usual symphony of decay. One brute, a mountain of a man known as Silas Grit Malone, noticed the twin sisters. "Look here, boys," he bellowed, his words slurred. Something new to play with he stumbled over, drunk and menacing, and snatched a piece of jerky from their small, shared plate. "Outsiders don't last long here. You two come here to die." It was Mai who replied this time, her voice a glacial whisper that cut through the noise. "We came to settle an account." Grit laughed loudly, a harsh, ugly sound. "Settle what?" "An old debt," Mai continued, her eyes as steady as stone. "The kind paid in blood." Silence fell for a heartbeat. Grit frowned, confused and angered by their profound lack of fear. He spat on their plate, a glob of tobacco juice landing beside the remaining food. He swaggered back to his table amid a fresh round of laughter. The sisters calmly wiped the spit away with a small cloth, finished their meal, dropped coins on the table, and walked out. Before crossing the threshold, they paused in the doorway, their silhouettes identical against the night. They turned their heads in perfect unison and looked back at the gunman's table. Their gazes lingered on each face, memorizing them one by one. Outside, under the yellow glow of oil lamps, a cold wind swept the streets. The names Mai and Lian meant nothing here, but somewhere in the past, the name Twin Dragons was whispered in fear, a terrible legend everyone would soon remember. Martha's boarding house smelled of soap and old timber. Mai and Lian climbed the creaking stairs slowly, each step measured, a reminder of a lifetime of discipline. Their room was simple, 2 cots, a chair, and a single window overlooking Main Street. Lian sat on her cot and pulled from her satchel the only valuable thing she carried. Mai sat beside her, producing an identical object. They were 2 halves of a single jade pendant, exquisitely carved. When joined together, they formed the image of a soaring phoenix. They held the pieces close but did not connect them. Not yet. They traced the cool, smooth stone with their fingertips, their eyes moistening, but they did not cry. They hadn't cried in a decade. The last time was in 1874, when as children they had found their home, a respected apothecary in a small California town, burned to the ground. Their father, a brilliant doctor who blended Eastern remedies with Western medicine, and their mother lay buried under the ashes. The culprits were a gang of thugs who wanted their father's book of formulas, seeking to twist his healing knowledge into a potent and addictive form of opium. He had refused them. The twins had been left for dead in the embers, but an old, traveling wushu master found them clinging to life and to each other. He took them in, trained them, and forged their grief into a weapon. He taught them that their identical nature was a strength, that their bond was a fortress. They learned to move as one, to think as one, to fight as one. They became legends in the shadows, the twin dragons of the Jade Mountain, warriors who moved with impossible grace, whose aim never failed, and whose hands could disable a man in a dozen different ways before he could even draw a breath. For years, they hunted the men responsible for their family's murder, finding them one by one. None of them died quickly. When the last of the known men stopped screaming, they vanished, seeking a life of peace. They thought their quest was over, until 6 months ago, when they learned a name that froze their blood, Marcus Taggart, the man who had held the torch, the one who had laughed as their home burned. He had escaped their vengeance, changing his name and disappearing into the territories. Now, after years of searching, they had found him. Marcus Grave Taggart was Corbin Hawker's right-hand man in Scorpion's Drift. Mai and Lian removed their simple shoes and lay down on their cots, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Their hands trembled, not from fear but from muscle memory. Their fingers remembered the weight of their revolvers, the perfect balance of a throwing knife, the cold steel of the reinforced ribs hidden within their silk fans. Outside, the laughter from the saloon continued, a chorus of doomed men, unaware that the twin dragons had awakened. Scorpion's Drift had just signed its death warrant. The storm was coming. Morning came with a brutal sun, turning the dusty streets into mirrors of heat. Mai and Lian awoke before dawn, as always, stretching with precise, deliberate movements that flowed like water. Every joint, every muscle, was a perfectly tuned instrument. They went down to the kitchen where Martha had already prepared coffee. "Morning," the widow whispered, her eyes full of concern. "It is another day," Leanne replied softly, accepting a cup. Martha served them black coffee and dry bread. As they ate, they watched the street through the window. Hawker's men were already prowling, shaking down merchants for their weekly protection fees. One thug, a massive man called Breaker, was beating an old blacksmith who couldn't pay. The man fell to the ground in a heap, and nobody dared to intervene. Mai's hand tightened on her cup, her knuckles turning white. Leanne placed a calming hand on her sister's arm. Martha noticed the change in their eyes, a flicker of cold fire. "Don't get involved," she pleaded quietly. "Those men kill for fun." Mai looked at the old woman, her expression unreadable. "Fun is a debt that can be repaid." The sisters stepped outside. The sun was a harsh glare, hiding their faces in shadow as they strode toward the blacksmith's shop. The old man still lay bleeding in the dirt. Breaker was laughing with his buddies. "Hey," he snarled as the twins approached. "This ain't your business. You two sticking your noses where they don't belong." Leanne straightened slowly, her posture perfect and unyielding. "This man owes you nothing. But you owe a debt you cannot pay." Breaker laughed and drew his revolver. "You got any idea who you're talking to?" "Yes," Leanne said serenely, her voice carrying an impossible weight. "A dead man walking." Breaker frowned, his drunken bravado faltering in the face of her absolute certainty. But some of the older townsfolk, those who remembered whispers from railroad camps and forgotten mining towns, felt a sudden, bone-deep chill. An old prospector trembled, whispering to his companion, "God help us." The twin girls. "Is it them?" Inside the saloon, Marcus Taggart saw them through the window. Recognition froze him mid-drink. The past had just caught up with him. He dropped his whiskey glass. Crystal shattered on the floor, but he didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the young women in the street, on the small, identical crescent-shaped scars just above their right eyebrows, scars he himself had given them with a hot poker 10 years ago. "It can't be," he muttered, his face draining of all color. "We left them burning with the rest of them, but he knew they hadn't burned." He had always known, deep down, that the ghosts would one day come for him. Now they were here, in the flesh. In the street, Breaker kept his gun aimed at Leanne, while Mai stood a pace behind her, a silent, deadly echo. Corbin Hawker emerged from the saloon, alerted by the sudden, unnatural silence. "What in the hell is happening here?" he demanded. Hawker was a tall man of 35, his face marked by smallpox scars, his eyes like dead coals. Breaker answered without lowering his weapon. "This pair of dolls stuck their noses in our business, boss." Hawker sized up the two unarmed young women in their elegant dresses, standing firm and unafraid. "Are you two crazy? You want to die?" Mai met his gaze with icy calm. "We do not want to die. We are looking for someone." "Who?" Hawker asked, intrigued despite himself. "Marcus Taggart," Mai stated. "We know he is here." The air froze. Hawker frowned, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Some of his men glanced nervously toward the saloon, where Taggart stood paralyzed at the window. "Don't know any Taggart," Hawker lied, his voice flat. "Yes, you do," Leanne said, her gaze shifting to the saloon door. "And he knows us." Taggart stepped out slowly, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver but not drawing it. The terror he hadn't felt since his youth gripped him like a vice. "Mai." "Leanne," he whispered, his voice broken. "I thought you were dead." "We were," Leanne replied, her voice dangerously soft. "Until we learned you were still breathing." Hawker looked from the terrified Taggart to the composed twins, his confusion turning to anger. "You know these women?" Taggart swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "They're the twin dragons." In that instant, the whispers became truth. The legend was real. The women who had hunted down a dozen men across 3 territories, who moved like shadows and struck like lightning. The deadliest showdown in the history of the West was about to begin. Hawker let out a dry, incredulous laugh, cutting through the silence. "The twin dragons? That's just a campfire fairy tale to scare greenhorns. He turned to the sisters with renewed contempt. Look, I don't know what stories got stuffed in your heads, but I run this town. If you want Taggart, you'll have to go through me and my 25 men. Mai didn't look away from Taggart, as if Hawker didn't exist. 25 men do not worry us. We have killed more for less. Hawker stopped laughing. There was something in her voice, a cold certainty, a calm only those who have stared death in the face countless times possess. Taggart took a step back. Corbin, listen to me. This is real. I saw them kill 5 men with my own eyes, with nothing but their hands and a pair of fans. They don't just shoot. They execute. You're paranoid, Hawker spat, though a seed of doubt had been planted. He instinctively reached for his revolver. Leanne spoke, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the street. We will give you one chance, Hawker. Hand over Marcus Taggart. Let us finish what we started 10 years ago, and we will leave. You and your men can stay alive. You can keep control of your miserable town. Nobody else has to die today. And if I refuse? Hawker asked, his pride stinging. Then everyone dies, Leanne stated simply. One by one, in the order we choose. Taggart will be last, just so he can watch all his friends fall before him. This is crazy. Breaker shouted. Boss, let me just blow their brains out. Hawker raised his hand, stopping him. He studied Mai and Leanne, searching for fear, for doubt, for any hesitation. He found nothing but an icy, twin void in those dark eyes. You've got until dawn tomorrow to leave town, he declared. If you're still here, I'll kill you myself. Mai nodded slowly. Tomorrow at dawn. Main Street. You, your men, and Taggart. May God have mercy on whoever survives. They turned in perfect unison and walked back to the boarding house, leaving 25 armed men watching them go. Deep in his cold heart, Corbin Hawker began to fear that Marcus Taggart might be right. Dawn broke red over Scorpion's Drift. The sun hadn't yet crested the mesas when Mai and Leanne descended the boarding house stairs. They wore the same deep indigo silk dresses, now fitted with simple leather gun belts from which 2 revolvers hung low on each of their hips. The image was a startling contradiction, the soft elegance of their heritage and the hard lethality of the West. Their steps were firm and rhythmic, the sound of 2 people marching into their final battle as one. Widow Martha waited for them with tea. You don't have to do this, she whispered, her hands trembling. Yes, we do, Leanne replied, her voice gentle. She and Mai drank the tea in one gulp, leaving a stack of silver coins on the table. If we do not return, this covers our room and our burial. The town was a ghost town. Windows were shuttered, doors bolted. Nobody wanted to witness what was coming. The sisters strode to the center of Main Street and stopped in front of the saloon, positioning themselves with the rising sun at their backs, blinding anyone who looked their way. The sky began to burn, painting the clouds blood red. The saloon doors burst open. Corbin Hawker emerged first, then Marcus Taggart, pale and trembling. And behind them, 23 men armed with rifles, shotguns, and revolvers, all aimed at 2 young women. Hawker smiled, a grim, confident slash across his face. Last chance. Mount a horse and ride. You don't have to die today. Mai spat on the ground. We have been dead for 10 years. Today, we are here to finish our work. Hawker gave a signal. His men spread out, forming a wide semicircle. This wasn't a duel, it was an execution. Got any last words? Hawker taunted. Leanne looked Taggart straight in the eyes. You held the torch while our family burned. They begged for mercy. You gave them fire. Taggart closed his eyes, tears streaming down his weathered face. I didn't want to, he stammered. Absolute silence. Hawker raised his hand. Aim. 23 weapons lifted. Mai and Leanne didn't move. Their hands hung at their sides, relaxed, near their revolvers. Ready. The wind stopped. The world held its breath. Then Hawker's command of fire was cut short as the sisters moved. In the next 7 seconds, history was written in gunpowder and blood. Their hands were a blur. For Colts cleared leather with an impossible, synchronized speed. Bang! 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 For men dropped before a single shot was fired at them. The air exploded with gunfire, bullets chewing up the dirt where they had stood a moment ago. Leanne rolled sideways with the agility of a cat, the indigo silk of her dress billowing for a moment before settling as she came up firing from behind a water trough. Mai dove forward, the silk of her skirt moving with her fluidly, never hindering her as she landed in a low crouch behind an overturned cart. Their movements were not just fast, they were precise, fluid, and perfectly calculated. From their separate positions of cover, they became a symphony of death. Bang! 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 3 more men fell. There was no rush, no fear in their actions. It was pure technique, a deadly dance honed through a decade of loss and rage. The gunmen shot at shadows while their partners dropped one by one. 40 seconds later, 15 men lay dead or dying in the street. Hawker retreated toward the saloon, frantically reloading. "They're devils! They're the damn devil," he screamed. Taggart stood paralyzed, unable to move, unable to shoot, just watching as Mai and Leanne advanced from their cover, moving in a slow, relentless, and inevitable pincer movement. The last 8 gunmen charged desperately, hoping to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. It was a fatal mistake. Leanne holstered her revolvers and drew 2 long, wicked-looking knives from her sleeves. Mai produced a steel-ribbed fan. The men closed in, and the gunfight became a maelstrom of close-quarters combat. Leanne was a whirlwind of steel, her silk dress swirling around her like a dark storm as she disarmed one man, sliced the throat of another, and disabled a third with a precise strike to his knee. Mai's fan was a blur, deflecting a punch, shattering a man's wrist, and then snapping open to deliver a blinding strike to another's eyes. It was over in less than a minute. 8 more bodies lay broken in the dust. Hawker stood alone. Him, Taggart, and 2 young women walking toward them like death itself. Mai and Leanne stopped 20 paces from Hawker. 23 dead. 2 left. Taggart fell to his knees, sobbing. "Do it," he choked out. "End this." But Hawker, ever the coward, raised his last revolver. Not at the sisters, but at Taggart's head. "If I'm dying, I'm taking this traitor with me," he growled. Bang! The shot thundered. Taggart slumped forward, untouched. Behind him, Hawker fell backward, a small, perfectly centered bullet hole between his eyes. Leanne's revolver was still aimed, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. "That was for our family," she said, her voice a final, cold judgment. She holstered her weapon and looked down at the weeping Taggart. From his pocket, she retrieved a small, leather-bound book, their father's journal. Mai stood over him, her expression hardening. She raised her hand, poised to deliver a final, fatal blow. But Leanne put a hand on her sister's shoulder. "No," she said softly. "He gets to live. Spend every day remembering. Spend every day being better than the coward you were." Without another word, Mai and Leanne turned and began to walk, heading east toward the sunrise. The twin dragons disappeared, melting back into the legend from which they came. Scorpion's Drift was finally free. 23 men lay dead in the dust of the town, and 1 broken soul was given a second chance. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from a badge or a courthouse. Sometimes it arrives with the quiet steps of ghosts who refuse to stay buried. Taggart wept amid the massacre, the crushing weight of his sins and the shocking burden of their mercy pressing down on him. The town would never forget the day the twin dragons returned. Stories of Mai and Leanne would be told for generations. Women who could kill with a glance, whose vengeance was precise, and whose mercy chose its moment. Scorpion's Drift could breathe again. The sun rose fully, casting long shadows over a town scarred but alive. And somewhere along the horizon, two lone figures vanished into the vast landscape, leaving only silence and dust behind. Mai and Lian, the twin dragons, had finished what they started 10 years ago. And in doing so, they became more than women. They became a story, a warning, a legend. A town once swallowed by fear now breathed again, free under the same sun that once watched it burn. They didn't just take revenge, they reminded Scorpion's Drift that evil never wins forever. Even the darkest night must face the dawn.